The hidden cost of fragmented attention. Fragmented attention is not just a distraction problem, it is an architectural problem. Every time your attention is pulled in multiple directions, the system is forced to reallocate cognitive resources, rebuild context, and reestablish focus. This constant switching creates an invisible tax on your identity. You don't feel the cost immediately because the system absorbs it quietly, but over time the fragmentation accumulates. It erodes clarity, it weakens discipline, it destabilizes rhythm. Fragmented attention is not harmless. It is structural decay disguised as busyness. Your attention is the most valuable resource in your cognitive architecture because it determines what the system prioritizes. Whatever captures your attention shapes your perception, influences your decisions, and reinforces your identity. When your attention is fragmented, your identity becomes fragmented. You begin to operate in short bursts of shallow focus instead of long arcs of deep engagement. You lose the ability to sustain momentum because the system is constantly resetting itself. The fragmentation becomes the rhythm, and the rhythm becomes the identity. Most people underestimate the cost of attention switching because each switch feels small. A quick glance at your phone, a brief scroll, a moment of noise, a minor interruption. None of these feels significant in isolation, but the system does not process them in isolation. Each switch forces the brain to drop its current cognitive state and rebuild it later. This rebuilding process is expensive. It drains energy, increases cognitive load, and disrupts the continuity required for high-level thinking. Fragmented attention is not a series of small interruptions. It is a continuous drain on the system's capacity. If you examine your life closely, you'll notice that your most unstable periods were defined by fragmented attention. You weren't overwhelmed because you had too much to do. You were overwhelmed because your attention was scattered across too many inputs. You weren't inconsistent because you lacked discipline. You were inconsistent because your cognitive architecture was overloaded. You weren't drifting because you lost motivation. You were drifting because your attention was being pulled apart faster than your structure could stabilize it. Fragmentation is the silent force behind most identity collapse. Fragmented attention also destroys depth. Depth requires continuity. It requires long stretches of uninterrupted focus where the system can build complex thoughts, refine ideas, and execute with precision. When your attention is fragmented, you never reach depth. You operate on the surface of everything. You start tasks but don't finish them. You generate ideas but don't develop them. You make plans but don't execute them. The system becomes trapped in a loop of shallow engagement, and shallow engagement cannot sustain a high-level identity. The hidden cost of fragmented attention is that it rewires your cognitive architecture. The system adapts to whatever it experiences most frequently. When your attention is constantly switching, the system becomes optimized for switching. It becomes restless. It becomes impatient. It becomes unable to tolerate stillness or focus. This is why people feel anxious when they try to concentrate. The system has been trained to expect fragmentation. Focus feels unnatural because the architecture has been shaped by noise. Fragmentation also weakens your constraints. When your attention is scattered, your boundaries become porous. You allow more noise into your system. You tolerate more interruptions. You accept more contradictions. The structure becomes unstable because the system is too overloaded to enforce the constraints that protect your identity. This is why fragmented attention leads to drift. The system no longer has the capacity to maintain the architecture required for stability. The most important thing to understand is that fragmented attention is not a productivity issue. It is an identity issue. It determines the version of yourself you are capable of sustaining. When your attention is fragmented, your identity becomes reactive, inconsistent, and unstable. When your attention is clean, your identity becomes coherent, intentional, and aligned. Attention is the gateway to identity, and when the gateway is fractured, the identity collapses. Fragmented attention is the silent force that destabilizes your entire system. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't collapse your identity in a single moment. It erodes it gradually by forcing your mind to operate in a constant state of cognitive reset. Every time your attention shifts, the system must rebuild context, reestablish focus, and reorient itself. This rebuilding process drains energy, increases friction, and weakens the architecture that supports your identity. Fragmentation is not a minor inconvenience. It is a structural threat. The system is designed to conserve energy, and fragmented attention forces it to spend energy constantly. Each switch, no matter how small, requires the system to drop its current cognitive state and reconstruct it later. This reconstruction is expensive. It increases cognitive load, reduces clarity, and destabilizes rhythm. When your attention is fragmented, the system cannot maintain the continuity required for deep work, stable identity, or consistent behavior. You begin to feel scattered not because you are scattered, but because the architecture has been overloaded. Fragmentation also weakens your constraints. When your attention is pulled in multiple directions, your boundaries become porous. You allow more noise into your system. You tolerate more interruptions. You accept more contradictions. The structure becomes unstable because the system is too overloaded to enforce the constraints that protect your identity. This is why fragmented attention leads to drift. The system no longer has the capacity to maintain the architecture required for stability. Drift is not a failure of discipline. It is the natural consequence of cognitive overload. If you examine your most inconsistent periods, you'll notice that fragmentation was always present. You weren't failing because you lacked motivation. You were failing because your attention was being fractured faster than your structure could stabilize it. You were trying to build momentum inside a system that was constantly resetting itself. You were trying to maintain clarity inside a system flooded with noise. You were trying to enforce constraints inside a system too overloaded to enforce anything. Fragmentation is the hidden variable behind most collapses. The danger is that fragmented attention feels normal. Modern environments are built to fracture your focus. Notifications, feeds, conversations, tasks, and digital noise compete for your attention every minute. The system adapts to this environment by becoming optimized for switching. It becomes restless. It becomes impatient. It becomes unable to tolerate stillness or depth. This is why people feel anxious when they try to focus. The system has been trained to expect fragmentation. Focus feels unnatural because the architecture has been shaped by noise. Fragmentation also destroys identity coherence. Identity requires continuity. It requires a stable internal narrative that is reinforced through repeated patterns of behavior. When your attention is fragmented, your internal narrative becomes fragmented. You lose track of what you were doing, why you were doing it, and who you were trying to become. The identity becomes reactive instead of intentional. You respond to whatever captures your attention instead of directing your attention toward what reinforces your identity. Fragmented attention creates a fragmented self. The most important thing to understand is that fragmented attention is not a productivity issue. It is an architectural issue. It determines the version of yourself you are capable of sustaining. When your attention is fragmented, your identity becomes unstable, your behavior becomes inconsistent, your perception becomes distorted, your rhythm becomes chaotic. But when your attention is clean, the system stabilizes, your identity becomes coherent, your behavior becomes predictable, your decisions become aligned. Clean attention creates structural integrity. The moment you begin treating attention as a structural resource instead of a mental preference, everything changes. You stop allowing noise into your system casually. You stop tolerating environments that fracture your focus. You stop accepting inputs that overload your architecture. You begin to design your life around cognitive stability. You protect your attention the same way you protect your time, your energy, and your identity, because attention is the gateway to all three. And when the gateway is fractured, everything downstream collapses. Fragmented attention has a hidden cost. It rewires your architecture. It destabilizes your identity. It weakens your structure. But when you reclaim your attention, you reclaim the system. And when you reclaim the system, you reclaim the identity it produces.